Triarius Wargaming here. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the video. We've got another vlog update on the Greek Hoplite project. And what I want to talk about in this vlog is I've got a couple things. So first of all, we have completed a big number of Thebans, maybe like 107 Thebans. So that's the first thing we'll kind of talk about in this video, these new units added to the army. I'll talk about how I kind of converted and modeled the army, a lot of conversions in this force. And then the final thing I would like to talk about in this video, and this will be at the end, so if you're kind of in it for the miniatures and you want to dip out, I do have kind of a hobby chat about the Historicon coming up, my ideas for the battle, and whatnot. And for the battle, of course, we're doing Carthaginians against Greeks, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about what I need, some thinking about the scenario and whatnot. So I'll talk about that at the end of the video. All right, so I do have a bit of an army showcase for you. Now, did the Thebans historically fight in the battle we're doing for Historicon? Not at all. And in fact, the city of Thebes was destroyed by Alexander the Great, and I mean literally destroyed, and the population sold into slavery a few decades or so before the Battle of White Tunis. So there really couldn't possibly have been any Thebans, at least, in any number, maybe a few survivors of the siege or something as fighting as mercenaries. But the Thebans are a major player in the Punic or in the Peloponnesian Wars, and before that as well, and really after that as well. So the Athenians and Spartans are pretty well known. The Thebans kind of get a bad rap, and part of that is because the Thebans sided with the Persians during the Persian Wars, and they didn't really produce any writers that survive to us today. So these units took a lot of conversion work, and I'll talk about some of my conversions and modeling ideas in a moment. But the Thebans will be really useful for me when I'm doing my own games, like not for Historicon. So, the Thebans are so critical in so many of these important battles. Leuctra, where they fight the Spartans and crush the Spartans, is one I really want to do, and others as well. And I think one pretty cool thing about the Thebans too is they fought very deep, sometimes in deep formations. So these units aren't quite done. I do want to do another back rank for one of the units, which is going to be kind of like the extra deep formation that they use, sometimes 25 ranks deep, like in Delium, the Battle of Delium, 430 BC, and then at Leuctra, they're actually 50 ranks deep. Now, the single figures are heroes, and to the strongest factions can get a certain number of heroes that they can use to basically reroll attacks, and depending on the faction, you get more or less of those. So I did a couple heroes up for the Thebans as well. My other Greeks are going to need heroes also. So yep, that's kind of the showcase, and now I want to talk sort of about my modeling decisions for these units. So the first real major modeling choice for the Theban troops is actually the shields. Now, all the shields have the Club of Heracles design on them. So Thebes was founded by Cadmus as the founder of Thebes, but Hercules was said to have been born in Thebes. So the Thebans really embraced this heritage. They loved Hercules. They loved actually like working out in the gym and emulation of Hercules as well. And unlike some shield designs from Greece, which like the Spartan Lambda is a little it's a little iffy. It's not, there's not a perfect historical record for that. The Thebans are very well attested to have painted the clubs on their shields from reputable authors. So that I think the clubs instantly sort of set them apart as Theban troops. Now you'll notice from the showcase, quite a few of the troops have these Boeotian helmets. So this helmet, it was actually called the Boeotian helmet in ancient times and originated in the region of Thebes. So Boeotia was kind of the region that Thebes dominated. They were part of the leaders of something called the Boeotian League. So this helmet, the ancients did actually call this the Boeotian helmet, unlike some of the other types, like the Illyrian helmet. What we call the Illyrian helmet today, the ancients most certainly did not call it that. But this was kind of based off of a felt cap that was commonly worn in the area that they then started to wear in metal. Now, would every single Theban have worn this style of helmet? Absolutely not. But I thought it would be a cool like regional characteristic to add a lot more of these helmets than I would in a normal force. Mostly, this helmet was used by cavalry from all over Greece due to the excellent visibility it offers. Now, the Theban force that I wanted to depict is mainly kind of focused on Leuctra, so there are a couple Corinthian helmets mixed in. Those would have been very like out of date by this time. I mean, I'm kind of imagining maybe some guy wearing his great grandfather's helmet, in honor of his great grandfather. They would have probably worn these things till they wore out, but these more open helmets are more fashionable by the 370s, whereas the Corinthian helmet is more Persian invasion era, like the 480s. This helmet, the Pylos helmet, I mixed a lot of these in as well. You often see them kind of like tied to the Spartans a certain degree, but this sort of helmet was really popular all over Greece during this Peloponnesian War period because it's very simple design. Um, it allows a lot of visibility, breathability, and whatnot. So I did a lot of these Pylos helmets in there as well to kind of show, this is sort of based off of that 370s height of Thebes army. Force did require a lot of conversion. So the first kind of conversions I did was actually sticking these Aventine miniatures metal successor heads onto the Thebans. And the reason why I use these is I just had them left over, and there's some really good Pylos helmets in there. They have the laurel wreaths on them, which kind of it might be a symbol of bravery, or they were Olympic athletes. So I wanted to get that nice mix in to get some variety because I'm just doing so many of these Victrix hoplites. So I also did some nude hoplites in them, slightly controversial. I do think, in this time period, we do see hoplites losing armor, becoming less armored. So I didn't do them fully nude, but I did them in sort of cloaks, which you do see in the artwork. And there is more evidence for it than I think, is sometimes given credit for, especially because the depiction of nude figures is not consistent, which, there is this kind of idea that maybe it's like heroic nudity, but sometimes the heroes are depicted clothes and their victims are depicted nude. And again, they're wearing this cloak, the chlamys, which is very indicative to the Greeks of like soldiers and travelers. So the Greeks definitely had different ideas about, nudity than, us today. So I don't think it's really that like crazy. It's not like they're fully nude, and is wearing a cloak like the chlamys really more protective than just a tunic. And again, like what it really seems is that in this period, the hoplites become less and less armored. So the nude guys were converted from Victrix naked fanatics, and then they had spears from the late Roman set to actually fit on their hands, and then some of the arms are from the other hoplite kits, and then the cloaks are from the Victrix late Romans as well. So I didn't do as many of those conversions as I originally planned, just because they were very time consuming. And also mixed in were some agema miniatures Etruscans, the ones who I felt like had some of the agema Etruscans are very Italian. These ones, I picked the most Greek looking ones, and I had a problem, a lot of people complaining about the size of the hands. I just cut the arms off and stuck the plastic arms on, and I think it worked really well. So that was kind of a test for when I do that. Now, one of those agema guys I thought looked exactly like this painting from the Osprey World of the Greeks book. Now, again, you see the guy, he's kind of wearing just the chlamys cloak, and not really a tunic. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting to include that figure because it was like straight from the Osprey book. And then that Osprey figure, it seems to be directly inspired by this fresco art from the Etruscan region, from Etruria. So I thought that would be kind of a cool little nod to do to the original artwork and the ancient sources and whatever. So here's kind of so if you can get a little bit of a size comparison, there's some Foundry next to the agema ones. I mean, you can see the agema guys, and they're now sold by Footsore Miniatures, are a little daintier than the Foundry, but I think they still fit in. And then you can see the Victrix guys compared to both. So the Victrix are not quite as chunky as the Foundry, but I think they mix in pretty well, and they are a little chunkier than the agema. The agema are the most petite, but I think, when they're all in the units together, they actually fit in pretty well, all things considered. So this was one of my inspirations for the Thebans. Again, there's kind of that nudity element, which I wanted to incorporate. You've got the Pylos helmet with the laurel wreath, which you saw I included a lot. And then the guy's also, he's got the Calamus cloak. All right, so now we have the totals for the month. So we had 144 generic hoplites in the last update, then 107 hoplites in this one. So we're at 251 figures for the month of January. Now, in all honesty and fairness, almost all of these troops, I mean, actually not almost all of these troops were painted in November and December. But like the Thebans, they didn't get their shields and they didn't get based up till January. The other hoplites didn't get their video until January as well. So what I'm going to be doing going forward is November and December is like crank time for me. That's when I have the time to actually really sit down and get troops painted in a major way. So I'm going to cut off this year's total in October. So when we get to next year, November and December will be looped into 2026. Okay, so that way we'll keep it fair. But since this is part of the same project, I wanted to just do the running count for the year, starting in, I guess November, and everything came together in January. So we're at 250, I'm going to say 251 figures for the year, and by adding, 2025, November and December to 2026 will equal things out. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk to you about in this game, in this video update, is the Historicon battle, my thoughts on it. So I've been reading this book, Carthage at War. Now, this book was recommended to me by the channel Evil Stew. He's got a great channel. He's got some awesome projects. Definitely recommend you checking him out. But I've been reading this book, and this book has some sections where it has a chapter on this battle, the Battle of White Tunis, which had some interesting, details that I've been thinking about. So, as we're getting into this game, so we've got the Syracusans with about 13,000 troops, 13,500, versus the Carthaginians with approximately 40,000 troops. So, depending on the ratios you go for, that is a pretty big difference in figures. And what I've been kind of thinking about is like, how do we, navigate these different, army sizes? So doing that on a scale of about 1 to 20 would require about 675 models in the Greek army. Now, Ranger is doing, 500 by himself, 550. I'm doing, probably well into the 600s in Greeks myself. So we kind of have maybe an oversupply of the Greek troops, and that's before even getting to the Samnites and Celts. But adding on to this, Athocles sailed to Carthage on 60 ships, and the sailors did potentially play a role in this battle. Now, he sailed on oared ships, on triremes and quadriremes, so that could be potentially 12,000 sailors who are present at the battle because they burned the ships, and the sailors are actually mentioned in the sources as a stratagem, adding to the back ranks of some of the units, but they didn't have, but using kind of leather covers stretched over a wicker frame to look like they were heavy infantry, but they weren't actually heavy infantry. So I'm kind of wondering with these troops, the archers are mentioned as being very significant. I think these numbers, like the Hellenic mercenaries, the Syracusans and whatnot, those are real, like, those numbers are for the heavy line troops and aren't really including, the sailors who I think would have acted as skirmishers. And they, it's I think reasonable, and the book mentions this, that they would have brought some kind of skirmishing equipment. I mean, the rowers on these triremes are not like delicate daisies. And in a number of other, in like the Peloponnesian Wars, you definitely have references to sailors coming ashore, and using whatever weapons they could find to fight. I mean, this is a Greek army stranded in Africa. It's really a win or die situation. You would think these sailors must have been involved in the action to some degree. And they also, before this battle, had defeated, captured several garrisoned Carthaginian cities, so they would have had supplies of extra weapons. So, you know, the point of me getting into that is I think we'll have some flexibility with the Greeks. Like I think their numbers might potentially be twice as high as is suggested. Now, many of those sailors, I would imagine, would probably be guarding the baggage and stuff like that. But, I think we have some room to play with there. Now, the Carthaginians, on the other hand, have about 40,000 troops, which on a 1 to 20 scale would be 2,000 models. And I just don't think that is going to be happening, especially like 2,000 chariots. The modern day authors kind of suggest that that's probably an exaggeration. Also, those 40,000 troops are mentioned to be specifically only Punic citizens. And our modern books kind of suggest, well, the city the size of Carthage probably could not support like 40,000 heavy troops just from the city alone. Like you think about Athens, the greater Athenian area, they could put like 10,000 hoplites into the field. So those 40,000 Carthaginians, I think, are unlikely to, be 40,000 heavy infantry. I think we're probably looking at way less Carthaginian heavy infantry. And the Carthaginians kind of like offer their own complications. I think what's interesting about this battle, it's, I think, 310 BC. That's a much more Hellenized, by that point, Carthaginian army than, that is kind of, we're in the successor period, the early successor period. Then maybe the Carthaginian army of, you know, 480 BC at the Battle of Himera, that first conflict. I imagine that army would be much more distinctly, I don't know, Phoenician in a way. I'm not sure. It would have, but by this point, they seem to be a little more Hellenized. I'm wondering, given these numbers, should these Greeks that I did in the last update, maybe they're going to need to play a role as Carthaginians to make up the required numbers. And the Carthaginians are going to require, a lot of thought as well, because, if I'm collecting a Carthaginian army, I want it to be useful for like a lot of different conflicts, like not just these wars with the Greeks. If I'm doing Carthaginians, I want to do those Punic Wars. And this battle, I think, is good again in certain ways because it is, it's not too far off from the First Punic War. So, kind of just wrapping up those thoughts, what I'm really thinking here is I think we have more room to play with the Greeks in terms of their numbers. I think, they could be potentially almost double the stated numbers of Greeks on the field, if you include those sailors who may have been serving as light infantry. And then with the Carthaginians, like I just don't think there's 40,000 fully equipped heavy infantry, as part of that force. I think the actual numbers of heavy infantry are much, much lower and maybe more in line with the size of the Greek army. And my main thoughts with that is just, where I'm at right now. Like, I want to get all these Greeks done and I want to have these kind of complete Greek armies. But on the flip side, like, every Greek that is completed, in a sense, is a Carthaginian who won't be completed. So I'm just kind of mulling over those thoughts around that. Are some of the Greeks going to be sort of conscripted into the Carthaginian forces, citizen Carthaginian hoplites, and also like how many Carthaginians are we really actually going to need? Because most of that, I mean, the Carthaginians are way off. We'll get to it when we get to it, but with the Greeks, we're kind of in the executing stage. The Carthaginians, for me, are kind of in the research and planning stage, but I need to start making those purchases, in the summertime. So that's going to be me signing off here. Thanks for sticking around if you stuck around this long. What I am going to do, that was my second video for January, so our next update is going to be coming early February. I'm not quite sure what we're going to have on the table then. Potentially Spartans, but potentially something else. It is going to be a few weeks at the least before I really get something out. So, maybe sometime in the second week of February, I think we'll have the first February update, and we'll actually have some troops completed for you on the table. But otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you in the next one.